Welcome to another edition of our leadership series sponsored by Lympha Press. We're taking a beautiful opportunity to shine a spotlight on the people who are making a difference in the worlds of lymphedema, lipedema, chronic venous insufficiency, and wounds. And when we talk about lipedema, there is one name that is inescapable. Her name is Catherine Seo, Dr. Catherine Seo, who you well know as the founder and CEO of Lipedema Simplified LLC and the Lipedema Project. Catherine Seo, I'm so happy to have this time with you.
Oh, hi, Brenda. It's always a treat to spend time with you.
Well, the thing is, you exude such warmth. And so when it comes to the concept of lipedema, that warmth has been a healing balm for so many people. Can you let everyone know what your background is?
When I make a presentation, I always give a little bit about my background. And then I say, the most important thing for people to know is that I have lipedema and I have lymphedema. And I've struggled with obesity on and off for my entire life, thinking that it was my fault. And so while getting a diagnosis of lipedema is pretty intense because here's a chronic disease, it's not ever going to get better. It could get worse. Well, I believe we can do something about it, and I'll talk to you about that. But my background is as a professor. I'm a professor and a researcher. And so all of the skills that I have in that area came in handy.
Well, one of the things, because I'm a communications major myself, that is your expertise. And so what has been so valuable is that your research and your personal knowledge, connecting the dots to communication. Communication is such a key, isn't it?
Oh, it truly, truly is. But it's so interesting because, just a little backstory is I hit perimenopause, and things that I had been doing for almost 30 years. I was on a very healthy and somewhat restrictive diet. I was low carb. I was exercising. Listen, I was doing everything right, not 100% of the time, but 80% of the time. They say that 80-20 rule. It's like 80% of the time I was doing everything right. And then I had some significant complications from perimenopause that resulted in surgery, that resulted in lymphedema.
Oh.
At that point, I had been misdiagnosed. No one even knew the word lipedema, and I was headed for a wheelchair. I was losing capacity in my arms and my legs, and I didn't think that was a viable option.
I think it's so important that people do know the backstories because they often fuel the passion. So what led you to the lipedema diagnosis and to your current role?
Oh, the short version, the very short version is I cried and cried and cried. I went to the hospital so many times. I asked so many questions until finally my surgeon fired me and said that I was asking too many questions. And I found myself outside of Mass General Hospital, supposedly the top hospital in the nation, not knowing what to do. And I came home. My primary care is wonderful. I continue to work with him as colleagues now because, together he helped me figure all this out. I came home and said, that's it. I may as well die. And then I thought, okay, well, since I know that that is an option, I'm not going to take that option first. Let me see if I can find another way. And the one thing that is still true about me is that I have this belief system that baby steps, small baby steps sometimes, and if you keep taking them, that you'll find answers. So that's what I said. Okay, nobody knows. I don't know, but the doctors don't know. So I'll just keep taking baby steps until I can't go any further. And that is literally what happened. I started, and one of the first things that happened is my MLD therapist, who is just a gem, just wonderful. I asked her if she could give me anything that I could read, being a professor. She handed me Professor Földi's textbook, which is the seminal book on the lymphology and the lymphatic system. I started to read it, and within the first hour, she had me on a pneumatic pump. It wasn't a Lympha Press at the time. It was before I knew about Lympha Press, but I was on my pneumatic pump, and I found the chapter on lipedema. And by the time she came into the room an hour later, I said to her, Melissa, I think this is what I have. I don't think it's just lymphedema. And she looked at me and she said, oh my goodness, I think you're right. I think that's what you have. And that was the beginning. Dr.
Ah,
Carmody, yeah.
I have goosebumps right now because we don't get to ask for what we're handed in life.
Mhm,
It's what we do with what we are handed.
mhm,
You went through a surgery that created lymphedema. Had that not happened, you might not have uncovered the lipedema and found this calling, which is helping so many other people. It is a story of the silver linings,
mhm.
and yet they're not silver because there's pain and struggle, and yet what beauty comes out of it. So I forgive me for interrupting. You were about to talk about Dr. Carmody.
Oh, no, I was just saying, I'm a firm believer in that we're not alone, that somehow there's an opening, and Dr. Carmody was that. Um, he was a very skillful, knowledgeable, and partnered with me. Like I would go in to see him and I would say, well, I found this out and I found that out. And he would say, well, here, and he would ask me good questions and make recommendations. And together we sort of unpacked it and started to understand about lipedema and what could be done. And then so part of my background as a professor was I taught a global community. I still teach at the university here in Cambridge, and we, for years have had very um, uh, international student body. And so I started to go around and travel. I went to the UK, and then I went to Germany, and then Amsterdam and Holland, and all these places where there were little pockets of doctors who knew about lipedema, and that's how it started to unfold. Never thought. My friend Barbara and I used to walk around Fresh Pond here in Cambridge, which is about a mile and a half. So we would walk around Fresh Pond, and I'm talking to Barbara and I'm saying, I got an invitation from these women who were having a gathering in Birmingham in the UK over the weekend. This was like in November of 2012. And they invited me to come. And Barbara's like, well, of course you're going to go. I'm like, how can I go to England for the weekend? Are you crazy? And she looked at me and she said, you're crazy not to go. And that was it. And when I arrived in Birmingham, that's a whole other story. Sure, driving on the left hand of the road, and I was going to die before I got there. But anyway, when I got there, I walked in and I was in a room full of women. There were probably 50 of us. And for the first time, I think in my entire life, I felt this incredible exhale because I was with people like me. It was amazing. And I never looked back from there.
So Lipedema, Simplified LLC, and the Lipedema Project. Which came first?
Lipedema Simplified came first because I needed a name, and one of the lipedema ladies was an attorney, and she said, well, let me help you. So she got it set up. And then I met Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith is currently the vice president of, what is his title? He is chief of surgery at Northwell Health. His main focus is breast cancer, but he's also the vice president of the Eastern region of Long Island. And so he's an amazing, first of all, he's an amazing surgeon and one of the kindest human beings that I've ever met. And so I met him through, interestingly enough, how life works. I met him through someone in the UK who connected me with him and his surgical partner that were doing lymph node transfer at the time. They invited me to New York. They were in New York, and I went into the OR with them, and I filmed some of their surgeries, and we ended up partnering. And it was with him that we established the Lipedema Project, because the Lipedema Project's role. So there's a distinction. People always ask me.
I love this. This is important, everyone. What is the distinction between Lipedema Simplified LLC and the Lipedema Project?
Yeah, Lipedema Simplified was the umbrella that we worked under, but the purpose of Lipedema Simplified is really to provide programs and online resources globally that help women with self-education and whatever they need, especially in terms of community. So the core thing that we offer is years and years of experience, knowledge, and community. And the Lipedema Project was really about the research side, much more about raising awareness with clinicians, educating about what is lipedema, how does it fit into the picture. We have published a number of papers out of the Lipedema Project, and our vision, we worked on this, they say the simpler something is, the longer it takes. But our vision is so simple: be the voice for women living with lipedema. Be the voice, to be able to get that voice out into healthcare, into the world, into places where those who don't know that what they have is lipedema can begin to understand it. So Dr. Smith was instrumental in making that happen. And so the Lipedema Project continues as a not-for-profit, and Lipedema Simplified continues with, we just had an event. We have several events a year, all online. We didn't start that way. We started face-to-face, but the pandemic sent us into into the Brady Bunch, into our Zoom boxes. And the benefit of it is that we were able to have so many women come from all over the world. We have women that come regularly from New Zealand and Australia and throughout Europe and South Africa and all throughout the UK.
And these events are amazing, and Lympha Press is so honored to be one of the sponsors. There is such a beautiful synergy between what you do and what we do. And I always say the more people that are gathered together to help the lipedema population, the better. We are all really shooting for the same goal, which is awareness and answers. And I love that your own personal story of a surgeon basically firing you for asking too many questions. You forged the way and continued to ask questions so that no other woman has to hear that.
Yeah, it's true. That's what I remember saying. First of all, more than once I've looked at myself in the mirror and said, are you crazy? are you doing? And the voice, we all have a still small voice inside of us. And if we get quiet enough and we listen, it's telling us. And the thing that it said to me is, if I had known, I'm old, happy, old. I'm 74 years old now. And I mean, I'm doing well and I'm happy. I have very few regrets. But if there's something that I can do to help those coming, oh my God, it makes sense of the ups and downs and circuitous curlicues of life when you have a purpose and a meaning. And I just hear it again and again and again, as I know you do, Brenda, as you hear it from women who say, oh my God, I didn't know. Thank you so much. My life has changed because I now know what's going on. I know you hear it. I know those of us in this field, we hear it again and again and again.
Yeah, it gives
If
meaning to life.
Yeah, and it's also that thing where someone says, oh my God, those are my legs. That's my body. That's what it looks like. I didn't think anyone else had a body like this.
I think your documentary is one of the most important works ever because it helped create that connection between the visual and the recognition.
Mhm.
So I have other questions on my list, as you know, but let's talk about that documentary for a minute. When did that happen? Was that at the beginning of your journey?
It
And
was
it's so well done.
thank you. It was at the very beginning when I finally made the decision to go to the UK for the weekend. In November, I went. It's so crazy, Brenda, the way life works. I In my advanced degree program, I studied media psychology, but with a focus on media. And I had an opportunity to take a course on how to make a documentary film. So I said, oh, good, so I was going to England and I said, well, I'm not going without something. So I took my camera and my equipment and I just said to everyone, I'm making a documentary film about lipedema. And it happened. I mean, it took a couple of years. I flew all around Europe and all around the US and interviewed anyone who knew anything about lipedema, patients, therapists. That's how I met Professor Földi. I went to the Földi Clinic in the Black Forest of Germany. I, I could not have, I mean, I was younger. I was a lot younger and I had a lot of oomph. And so, I literally just rented a car, had camera equipment in the back, and went from stop to stop to stop to stop all throughout Germany and Amsterdam and places in Holland, because there were a couple people in Holland. It was, as they say in the 60s, it was a trip.
Well, as someone who knows you now, I would say your oomph level has not diminished. And for those who might be watching this, we have two audiences. We have patients and clinicians. I want to direct them to where they can see that documentary. And it lives on your website, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's a link on the website. So lipedemaproject.org, you'll be able to link. It's up for free on Facebook. So we just tell people to watch it there. You can also get it on the website, lipedemaproject.org.
Good.
And yeah. And the thing is, it came out in 2015. That's 7 years ago. We have learned so much about lipedema in the past 10 years. And there are things in the documentary that I would want to add. Like we now know that low carbohydrate is very successful in reducing pain and eliminating symptoms. We know that certain movement, that being in a pool, using a rebounder, using the Lympha Press, which I think, I mean, that's what I use, can help to prevent the progression. For those of us in some of the advanced stages, we can have some regression, but mostly what we can do is stop the progression. And that's what the most important thing is, until we come up with the cure, which would be nice.
And that would be the end goal. Absolutely. So for the patients watching this,
Mhm.
if you wanted to give them one message, what would that be?
Um, it's a good question, Brenda. Mostly that you're not alone, that most of us feel so alone before we hear the word lipedema and understand that it's a disease process and we're not to blame. And that you can decide, you can literally make decisions to implement. Again, I go back to micro actions, small things you can do on a daily basis that can improve your life. And you can live with it. Yeah, that's it. You can live with it. Not only can you live with it, you can celebrate your life, live well. I love what's Mary Oliver. Well, first of all, I love her
I
work.
love Mary Oliver too. Go
Ma-
ahead. I won't stop you.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of one of her poems is, tell me, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And I think for us as patients, there's so much body dysmorphia and body distortion because we have a disease that is physically disfiguring.
Mm.
And having that in a culture that reveres, first of all, thinness, that reveres and objectifies women's bodies, there's so much that we can grow through in terms of our own acceptance and love and self-love and having a precious life.
You're definitely speaking to a subject that means so much to me personally. I am actually doing a talk on settling your worth, because lipedema or not, I feel like that is a foundational issue for so many of us. I know it has been in my life. I did a poll of the attendees. 100% of them had been bullied.
Mm,
And I know you're not surprised,
mhm.
because we live in this society where body image is it's what you see, it's front and center, and people are shamed.
Yeah.
And then that leads to that, it's not, it's your fault. It's
Mhm,
your fault, that judgment.
mhm,
So I love this message of celebrating your beautiful life and living well.
mhm.
Anything more on that topic before I ask you, what should clinicians know? What's the takeaway for clinicians from this interview?
Um, I think the takeaway for clinicians is that they make a difference. And while the lymphatic system is barely, and I'd say barely because it used to not at all be taught, but thanks to the really innovative work of folks like Stan Roxon from Stanford, in naming it, they are now teaching to some degree that it's, your patients look to you for some guidance. You can't solve it, you can't fix it, but guide it, you can, with a little bit of knowledge. Our book is an overview for clinicians. Short book, it's a monograph. You can read it in an hour, and it gives you enough knowledge to be able to identify and even be able to diagnose lipedema. And the other thing that I would say, So from the days of being outside Mass General, being so angry and upset and feeling abandoned by the healthcare system, to being involved in the healthcare system over the past 10 years, I have such compassion for the distortions that we're living with in terms of our systems. And healthcare is one of those systems that's incredibly distorted. And understanding that for the most part, our doctors do not go into medicine to hurt us. Our doctors go into medicine because they want to help. And that finding a way to partner with your patient, for the patients, finding a way to partner with your healthcare providers. It's like, oftentimes I've been there. My mother used to say, you get more bees with honey than with vinegar. It's like, I've gone in so upset and, that didn't work. I can promise you that didn't work. But going in with a understanding, Dr. Carmody said, though at the time I didn't realize I was doing it, that I would go in with a piece of the puzzle. And I would say to him, I have these 3 questions. This is what I'm looking at. Can you help me figure this out? So I gave him a manageable size, not the entire thing, that here's this disease that nobody knows about that affects the lymphatic system, the metabolic system, the adiposity, that it's interstitial and that it can end up, there's so many pieces to a very complex, really a complex pathophysiology called lipedema. But these smaller pieces are manageable. And enrolling your patient, enrolling your healthcare provider can make a huge difference.
I want to go back to the book you mentioned.
Yes.
Because I think that's a resource that patients bring that into their medical professionals?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon. It's called Lipedema, the disease they call fat, an overview for clinicians. We wrote it for clinicians. It was 10 docs literally around the world. And in terms of, okay, let me step back and say, it's written for the provider. It's accessible to the patient. We didn't make it so complex that a patient couldn't understand it. That was really our goal.
Excellent.
And so it's short.
Good. I love it. So we are giving people not just wonderful information and your story, but resources that they can access long after they watch this interview. I love asking this question about success stories related to your work. Can you think of one that really leaps to your mind and heart?
Oh my goodness. Really, it's, women in our community. When I first met Leslie Keith, we met at NIH at the National Institutes of Health. And she was presenting her research on a ketogenic way of eating for lymphedema. And I say this often, almost simultaneously, we looked at each other and said, I think this could work for lipedema. And this was in September 2015. And I was on my way to Europe and she was finishing up some research. So it was almost a year later that we connected again. And I think the very first, we did a online webinar and we presented this information and we got a email from one of the ladies who said, I tried it and it worked. I tried it and it worked. She, this came a couple months later and she had lost weight for the first time. Not only had she lost weight, but her swelling had reduced and her bruising had reduced and her pain had reduced. And I remember Leslin and I looking at each other and going, holy cow, this might actually work. And that was, we have so many stories of listening to the community and taking the feedback. So we'll go in a direction, we'll get some feedback. The feedback either is keep going or take a turn or change this a little bit. And through the years, what we've done is we've honed it in. And that's what I love. That's also what I love about community.
Mm.
I
And
love that. We
you've gone,
learn from each other.
yeah. Oh, it's so true. It's invigorating. And the support, I love how the women that I've met who have lipedema are some of the biggest hearted, warmest,
Mhm.
kindest, most empathetic, sensitive people. And it may be just because of the hand that they've been dealt and how they respond to it. But then when they come together, it's such a powerful and beautiful thing. So what's on your wish list for the future, Dr. Catherine Seo?
Oh my goodness, a cure. I'm a firm believer that there's always a solution. And I think that we're starting to get more research, more clinical trials. And it's through that process that, first of all, we'll have a clear diagnostic process, then we'll have treatment, and then we'll have a cure. Is it possible? I don't think it's going to be in my lifetime, but I think, who knows, maybe it will. We'll see. You never know.
You never know. And it's certainly a worthy goal. So as our time ends, first of all, I want to thank you because you're so busy and you are always busy giving and helping the lipedema population. I love that this interview is going to give people insight into how you got where you are and the backstory. But if you would leave our audience with one thought, what would that be?
Good question. So someone once told me, dream big. If you, if you set a goal for yourself, say you're going to shoot for the moon. If you set a small goal for yourself that says, I'm going to shoot for the end of the block, you'll never even come close to the moon. So, but if you set a goal that says, I'm going to the moon, you might not make it, but you might end up somewhere in the stars. You're going to get a whole lot further if you dream big. And so that's why, when someone asks me, it's like, yeah, a cure. Why not? We may not get there, but we can certainly aim for it.
And with that, I want to thank you on behalf of Lympha Press and all the people that you have helped. Thank you for dreaming big. Thank you for making things happen. Thank you for continuing to move this forward in a place where, my hope is as well. There is a cure, but Catherine, you're a remarkable woman and I admire you a lot. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Brenda. It's always a delight to connect with you. Thank you.
I agree. And thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Leadership Series sponsored by Lympha Press. Tune in again next time when you'll get more information about people that are making a difference to help patients and clinicians in these disease conditions. Have a great day, everyone.